to Marky Moon Television. We have a very special guest this evening. He's known to be one of the greatest generals in U.S. history, but not known to be one of the greatest presidents. Our special guest tonight is Ulysses S. Grant. Welcome, Mr. Grant. If you could please, President Grant.
It's okay.
If you could please start, just tell us, what was it like coming up as Hiram Ulysses Grant?
Well, Mr. Verlaine, first of all, most people don't realize my name is Hiram. However, my initials, Hiram Ulysses Grant, form the word hug, which didn't go over well, I think, particularly in the Army. At which point, somewhere along the way, I was designated as Ulysses Grant, my middle name, with an S in the middle, which U.S. Grant is strangely apropos. Bucci! It's one of my horses, sorry. Growing up was difficult. I grew up in Ohio. My father was a tanner, which I did not like. Every day there were livestock was slaughtered, and I didn't like that. I was a fairly sensitive young man, which again, a lot of people don't know that about me. But with that, I was very good with the horses. So, you know, coming up, I didn't quite fit what my family wanted. I couldn't go into the family business. And eventually I ended up in the Army. I ended up at West Point, which, again, I didn't really wish that on myself. The Army life, as people have heard me say, it wasn't for me. But somewhere along the line, the United States military did pan out for me. That's where a lot of what people know about me came to be.
President Grant, could you tell us about some of the successes you have enjoyed in life?
Sure. Those are easier, obviously. As I said before, my father being a tanner, and then having to deal with that, I found myself spending more time with the horses. Some people even said I had a mystical way with them, which may or may not have been true, but the horses were my life. I could stand on the back of a horse and ride it at a very young age, and at a very young age I was controlling all horse activities on the farm. So that was my first great achievement in life. Can you excuse me 1 minute? I'm going to let this cat in. Get in here and just stop making noise. My apologies. So, then in the military, like I said, it wasn't for me, but I had some successes in the war against Mexico, even though I still deem that an unjust war. I did have success. I learned a lot about military life there. I was also successful in my marriage. My wife and I were quite in love for all of our years. Aside from the early years in the Army, we spent a great deal of time together. We were nary apart. So then, of course, came the Civil War. President Lincoln, made me the top general in the U.S. Army for the Union in the Civil War, which was a difficult task. It was I rarely slept. I didn't enjoy it. But nonetheless, we won the battle and maintained the Union. And then, of course, I was elected to be president, which might be deemed a success, but I had no training. I didn't want it. But while I was there, I will say I did everything I could to protect the civil rights of the freed slaves, the African Americans in the South. And I passed the 15th Amendment, giving all men the right to vote, including the freed slaves. So those are my, I would say those are my greatest successes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could
Thank
you
you,
now
Mr.
at
Verlaine.
this time tell us a little bit more about the disappointments in your life?
Well, I have to be honest, I've had many. As great as my successes were, I fear my disappointments were greater. I was known as a young child to have no business sense. That's another reason I could never go into my family's business. I just didn't get it. I've always been too trusting, and that really came to fruition as president. I trusted too many people. That's enough. Stop. My apologies. And, lo and behold, we have the Panic of 1873. Several of my cabinet members were just bedded in scandal. And I ended up bankrupt. Later in life, if it wasn't for Mark Twain helping me with my memoirs, I would have died penniless. And I thank him for that. But, most of my downfalls were strictly errors in judgment. And, thankfully I have been able to have some successes.
For our parting moment, Ulysses, if I may call you Ulysses.
It's fine.
How would you sum up your life? What is the theme of the life of Hiram Ulysses S. Grant?
Ooh, wow. It's a question everyone should answer. It's very deep, Mr. Verlaine. I think for me, although I wasn't necessarily a successful man at all times, I've been able to rise up at the moments where I needed to. Not doing well at the tannery as a youth, and yet thriving as a horseman. Not wanting to be an army soldier at any point, yet thriving as a horseman in the army, and then leading the Union against the Confederacy. Another thing I did not wish to do. Becoming penniless at one point because of lack of judgment, or errors in judgment, and trusting those I shouldn't. It all ended up fine in the end. I did not die penniless, so it just goes to show you might not be great at everything or all things, but if you can come through at the moments where you need to, where you absolutely have to, that is what I've done. Thank you.